Thanks, Renee. So everyone, thank you for joining. Sorry about the technical kind of hiccup at the beginning, but these things tend to happen on Zoom. As mentioned, my name is Andrew Jang. I'm the Senior Manager in Strategic Talent Acquisition with Make a Future. And today I'm going to be talking about careers in BC. As you've probably heard maybe in the news or social media or from friends and family, it's a great job market in British Columbia right now. There's over 700 teacher job postings as of, I guess, yesterday or this morning on Make a Future. And I think when I ran a filtered search, there are over 400 full-time postings as well. So excellent time to consider moving out west. There's a lot to offer in British Columbia. And today I'm here just to answer your questions and also to highlight some of the things that are interesting about teaching in BC and that would be advantageous for a new teacher starting their careers. So originally, my colleague Cheryl Edge, she was supposed to present today's session. She's actually attending a French Teachers Roundtable session. So I just want to kind of highlight Cheryl's role just for a brief second. And the reason for that is because if you're a French teacher, right now, it's a great time to find French teaching jobs in BC. There's lots and lots of opportunities. And Cheryl's job is actually funded by some special funding through Heritage Canada to bring French teachers to British Columbia. And if you are a French teacher, FSL, or a French immersion teacher, please get in touch with Cheryl. She may actually be able to provide you some information on financial incentives that districts may be able to provide you as well, such as relocation costs. So definitely connect with Cheryl. And if I don't remember to provide her email in the chat later, just send me a reminder. So Make a Future is based in British Columbia, and because we're based in British Columbia, I just want to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. Our work at Make a Future really spans across the traditional homelands of hundreds of Inuit, Métis, First Nations people across BC, each with their own unique traditions, history, and culture, and we are committed to reconciliation and to strong Indigenous partnerships. So usually there's a poll here, but because this is not my Zoom, I'm just going to skip it. So today I'm just going to quickly go over, the job application process in British Columbia, and also go over a quick Q&A. So before I kind of jump into everything, I just want to quickly provide an overview of Make a Future and the province. So Make a Future, we're not just a job board. We were created back in 2008 as a joint partnership between the Ministry of Education, the 60 Boards of Education, and also the BC Public School Employers Association. So we're not necessarily a government body, but we're not for profit. And we currently work with all the public school districts in British Columbia, independent schools, First Nation schools, and offshore schools as well. So any jobs that you're looking for in K-12, whether it's teaching or non-teaching roles, such as EAs or tradespeople or bus drivers, you can find all that information and all those opportunities on makeyourfuture.ca. So I'm just going to provide a quick overview about what it's like to teach in the public school and kind of compare that to First Nations, independent, and offshore schools. So in BC's public schools, it's the school districts that do the hiring. So I know in some provinces that they're called boards. We do have boards as well, but that actually has a slightly different meaning. So when you're applying for a job, you're not necessarily applying for a specific school in the public sector. You're applying to the district, and from there they'll assign you to a particular school, or you'll apply for a particular assignment in a school. One difference that I want to highlight is, I'm not sure if this is still a requirement in Ontario, but at some point, I believe there was a requirement to work a certain number of hours before you're able to apply for a full-time position or a contract in Ontario, but that's not the case in British Columbia. You can, if you find a full-time position and your credentials match the qualifications of the job, you can apply directly to those full-time positions in BC. And as I said to you earlier, there's lots of opportunities, like over 700 opportunities that are available right now. And these are opportunities that start right now and also opportunities that start in September as well. So our occasional teachers or substitute teachers are called TTOCs, or Teachers Teaching on Call. I know it's a crazy long acronym, but I just want to highlight that difference for you. And I know in some provinces, occasional teachers are not paid on scale, so they're paid a little bit less than regular classroom teachers, but in BC, you're paid on scale from day one. So that's teaching in the public system for you. I'm just going to do a quick overview of what it's like teaching in the First Nations schools. So First Nation schools are considered independent schools in BC. They're very culturally diverse schools just because they're run by very distinct bands across the province. These schools are constantly hiring, and because BC's current curriculum has such an emphasis on First Peoples perspectives and ways of learning, this is excellent experience to gain. So if you have experience in a First Nation school, you're very employable in the public school system or independent school system in the future. And just to let you know, teachers in the First Nation schools, they're not unionized, so they're not bound by any restrictions in the collective agreement or any teachers contracts. At the same, which in some cases provides them with flexibility. So, a teaching salary, a starting teaching salary in BC's public schools can range from 58 to 61,000 in the first year. But in a First Nation school, because they're not bound by the collective agreement, they can start you higher. There's actually one nation that I spoke to earlier last week in Calgary, and they said they were paying teachers a starting salary of 75,000 a year, and they were also paying for teachers' accommodations and also relocation costs as well. So if you are interested in First Nation schools, they're all located across the province in every region. And yeah, just make sure you put on your negotiating hat, just because there are some differences in terms of compensation there. So independent schools. So in BC, our independent schools include a variety of different schools, but basically what's considered an independent school is because they receive ministry funding, but they also receive a portion of their funding via tuition and fundraising. So these are like our Catholic schools, IB, Waldorf schools. There's certain schools that target special ed, outdoor education, and different faiths as well. And these are schools located all across British Columbia, but the majority of them are based in the urban areas. And the independent schools are a great thing, a great system to get into if, say, you're a passionate Catholic educator, and you want to work in that specific environment, or maybe you have an interest in Montessori or Waldorf education, and you want to develop your skills in that area. So independent schools, that's another great way of gaining that experience, and also the training as well. Because if you don't have a Waldorf background, a lot of these Waldorf schools will actually provide you that training. And if you have a specific interest in maybe outdoor education, or something that's very specific in your educational philosophy, then check out independent schools. If you're kind of curious about what independent schools operate in BC, if you go to makeafuture.ca, which is our recruitment portal, there's employer profiles of every single district, but also independent schools, so you can get a better sense of what would it be like to work at Sunrise Waldorf School versus Victoria Waldorf, for example. So independent schools, most of the independent schools employ non-unionized teachers. There are a few schools in the independent school system where they have unionized teachers, but because they're not unionized, as I mentioned here before, compensation it really varies from school to school. Some schools pay at the same level as the public schools, and some schools pay above. And some schools have benefits that match the public system, and some schools that have benefits that are below. So really buyer beware. So make sure you have a chat with the recruiters at the independent schools to make sure you know what you're getting into. And that kind of goes for the same as BC certified offshore schools. So you might be wondering, what's the difference between a BC certified offshore school and another offshore school in the UK? So BC certified offshore schools are regulated by the BC Ministry of Education. And in these schools, teachers teach the BC curriculum, and students are actually studying to try to earn a Dogwood diploma, which is our certificate in BC. So these schools are located all over the world. We have schools in China, Thailand, Egypt, Qatar, India. I believe there's one in Paris and Colombia as well. So if you're really thinking about getting some international experience and you want to do some traveling at the same time, BC offshore schools are a good option for you. And the reason why I would suggest a BC offshore school versus some random UK school, for example, is that the experience that you gain from these offshore schools will be comparable to the work that you do in Canada. And because it's comparable to the work that you do in Canada, when you come back to Canada, that experience is more likely to be recognized than if you worked in, say, India in a non-certified school. So definitely a good opportunity to check out. There's opportunities posted year-round. Most of the recruitment happens in the spring. The school in Japan typically recruits in the early new year, and it's a great way of saving money and travel. A lot of the schools will pay for your plane ticket overseas. They'll also help you out with the accommodation. Sometimes they'll also provide you with meals as well. And usually there's a return trip that they pay for as well. So during holidays, so the winter break, they'll send you, a plane ticket back to wherever you're from. And the independent schools, like I said, I mean, the offshore schools are similar to the independent schools, so you have to negotiate your own contract with them. And just make sure you have all the details before you arrive, just because, the experience from one school really varies from the experience to others. And as I said, you can teach full-time right away in these certified schools, BC certified schools. So it's a great way of kind of fine-tuning your skills overseas and then coming back and applying those new skills back in Canada. So I see that there's a question right now. So maybe this is a good time because it's a natural transition to my next set of slides. So I have a question from Esther. You mentioned that schools are not unionized. Would you still need to apply and register for a body like the OCT? Yeah, so the public schools, definitely you need to apply for a teaching certificate. That's through the teacher regulation branch, which I'll talk about a bit more later. So the teacher regulation branch has a variety of different certificates. And so there's one specifically for public. Well, if you have a public school certificate, that kind of qualifies you to teach in every system. But if you have lower credentials, you may qualify for a First Nation certificate or an independent subject restricted certificate as well. But yeah, every province has their own kind of regulating body. Ours is the teacher regulation branch. And the teacher regulation branch, they issue what's called a COQ, which is called the Certificate of Qualification. And that allows you to teach anything. So, if you have a subject restricted certificate, obviously you can only teach that specific certificate. But if you have an unrestricted certificate from the teacher regulation branch, you can teach any grade, you can teach any subject. It's not restricted in any way at all. Your employability and whether or not you're hired for the job will kind of depend on your transferable experience and also your education. So just because I say, hey, you can teach elementary even though you're a secondary teacher, that's not necessarily true. Districts will always kind of look at the your range of experience and who you've and what grade levels you've worked with in the past as well. So every school in the public system is unionized. So I just want to clarify that. It's just that if you're working in the First Nations system or the independent or the BC offshore system, you're not part of the BCTF, which is our teachers union. There's no requirement for that. And as I also said, in the independent school system, there is also a few schools that have unions, and I don't believe they're part of the BCTF. They're kind of like their own little unions that they've set up there as well. There are pros and cons of being in the union. Obviously, being in the union, you have their support. So if anything happens to you in the school where you need kind of a representation, they'll kind of back you up on that. And being a part of the union, you're also part of provincial negotiations for salaries and benefits. So that's another positive for that as well. And just in case you haven't been following the news, the BC teachers recently settled a new agreement with the government. So that new agreement between the union and the government included a salary increase. I believe that the first year was 5%, and I believe the second year that increase will come in July, and the percentage of that increase will kind of be determined by kind of market inflation, which will be determined sometime in March. So a lot of positive things happening in BC. In the past, people have said that our teachers were paid kind of one of the lowest in Canada, but that's not the case anymore. And if you look at total compensation, including benefits and also work hours and class sizes, BC teachers are actually fairly well off compared to other jurisdictions. Okay, so moving on, I think I already talked about this, so I'm just going to skip over it. I think it's just a duplicate slide that I had. So just in terms of the demand for teachers, right now there's a huge need for obviously on-call teachers because we're mid-year. But there's also a huge demand for teachers in rural and remote schools. And because there's a huge demand for teachers in rural and remote schools, the province will be providing some financial incentives to recruit teachers to smaller communities like Fort St. John, for example, Prince Prince George, and districts that are outside of urban areas. And I just want to clarify that, rural doesn't necessarily mean remote. Rural actually sometimes just means it's a smaller city or a bigger town. There are obviously remote schools where you have to drive like a couple hours to get to those locations, but not every single rural school is considered remote. So in addition to that upcoming incentive, every year, rural and remote teachers actually receive a recruitment incentive of up to $2,700 annually for full-time roles. So that's something that's also available to you as well. And if you're wondering when the jobs come out, obviously there's lots of jobs right now, but the majority of postings come out in kind of May and June for September. And even if you don't have your certificate at that point, you can still apply for positions. Just make sure you mention in your cover letter that you've already applied for your OCT and you've also started your application for the BC teacher regulation branch. Districts understand that sometimes there's a backlog for teacher certifications, just because grads always all come out at the same time, so that kind of creates a backlog. So they understand. So don't be too worried if you don't have your certificate just yet. So a few other extra things I want to mention about independent schools. Most of the schools are in urban city centers. And unlike Ontario, our Catholic schools are not public school boards, they're independent schools. So just be aware of that. First Nation schools, one other thing I forgot to mention is that they're generally multi-grade classrooms and smaller classrooms. Hiring is usually year-round, so you'll see jobs posted all the time. And another thing to also kind of be wary of, if you do see jobs posted year-round, you might want to ask the band why there are so many, I guess, retention issues, because that could be a red flag. You see offshore schools, like I said, they're all over the world. Just make sure when you're applying for these jobs that you read the contract carefully and that you understand, what your obligations are and also the pay and benefits too. Another benefit of offshore schools I forgot to mention is that there's also retention bonuses. So if you stay like a certain number of years, they keep on adding to your salary. So I just want to quickly show you some teacher hiring trends. So this is from last year. So this is a bit deceiving because I actually just created a new graph a few days ago, which kind of shows actually quite a significant spike in the number of postings in December 2022. I believe there was a 40% increase in teacher job postings this year compared to last year. So definitely going through it's a 30% increase in teaching jobs from last year and a 40% increase from 2 years ago. So lots of jobs in BC. If you're wondering where the jobs are, obviously most of the positions are in the more populous regions, Vancouver Island and Vancouver, that's where, we have the highest population. I'm not sure why Vancouver is not on this chart. Maybe it just got cut out, but that's where most of the jobs are. But in my new chart, you'll actually see that there's a lot more jobs in Northern BC this year compared to previous years. So what's in demand? So this chart is a little bit updated, but it's fairly accurate to how things are going in BC. A lot of primary positions advertised right now. If you have a background in working in special ed, learning assistant resource teachers are in huge demand. Learning support teachers, learner support teachers are a huge demand as well. French immersion, like I said to you earlier, counselors, English, math, teacher librarians, and the list kind of goes on. So if you're looking at this list and you're a social studies teacher and you're kind of panicking, you're like, oh no, there's no social studies jobs out there. That's not true. I only just listed a few ones that kind of stood out in the data. There's definitely social studies positions that are currently available. Districts are pretty much hiring in every single subject area and grade level right now. So I kind of plugged Cheryl earlier. So if you're interested in teaching French, which my graph kind of emphasized, email Cheryl. That's her email address, enseigner@makeitfuture.ca. She's our bilingual recruitment specialist. So she can connect you with districts and also let you know about the potential recruitment incentives that are available. And she actually used to be a principal at a elementary school. So if you're kind of wondering about the education system in BC and what the differences are, she can help you answer those questions too. So, even if you're not a French teacher, feel free to reach out to Cheryl. So the application process, so I'm just going to jump into that. So if you haven't been to the Make Your Future website, that's pretty much the platform that all public school districts use to advertise their positions and accept applications. There are a few school districts that prefer to receive applications via email or via their own system, but I can confidently say that 90% of the districts will tell you to apply on makeyourfuture.ca. And all the independent schools that advertise their jobs on Make Your Future will also ask you to apply for jobs on our website as well. So this is what our website looks like. So if you want to jump directly to the job board, just click find a job. But we also have a lot of other useful information on our website. So we'll have employer profiles. So, if you're interested in working for VSB, but you're not really sure what's the difference between working in Vancouver versus North Vancouver School District versus West Vancouver School District, we have all that information in our employer profile section. Another section that I also want to highlight is that on our homepage, if you scroll down kind of halfway, there's something called the featured job opening section. So these are jobs that districts tell us to help them highlight. And because we're highlighting these jobs, that signals to me that there is not a lot of candidates and these jobs are difficult to fill. So, if you see a job in this section and you feel like you're qualified, apply for that right away because you'll have a pretty good chance of getting those opportunities. Another thing also to recognize is that we also have salary grids on our website. So if you're kind of wondering, where do I fall on the salary grid? Check that out on our site. It's called the Salary Finder. You can just go to the site search and find that. So just in case you're wondering, why is the salary that I mentioned earlier lower than the screenshot? It's just because I created the screenshot last year. So it's old data. And if you're kind of wondering what steps and categories mean, categories are based on your education. So when you apply to BC, so in addition to applying for your teaching certificate, you also have to apply for your TQS card. So TQS card is issued by an organization called the Teacher Qualification Service. So they basically evaluate your credentials, your education, and any additional training that you've had, and they'll assign you to a specific category. And then the steps on the salary grid reflect your years of experience. So, if you're a new teacher coming out of the teacher education program, most likely you'll end up in category 5 based on if you went through a Canadian program, and you'll start in step 1. We actually just eliminated step 0 on the last collective agreement. So step 5, step 0. And as I said to you, that salary is not accurate. This is just an old screenshot. So something else to know. So just keep that in mind. When you're coming to BC, you need your teacher regulation branch certificate and also your TQS certificate, your TQS card as well. So when you're applying for jobs on Make Your Future, you have to create a separate account for each district. And that's because there's no central HR department that reviews all applications. So if you're applying for a job with Vancouver, you have to create a separate application. If you're creating an account for North Vancouver, you have to create a separate application. So that sounds like a lot of typing and work, but we have something called BC Passport, which allows you to link your account. So suppose you've already created an account with VSB Vancouver and you want to apply for a job with North Van. So if you go to North Van's registration page, you'll see a button on the right-hand side that says link account. So all you have to do is click link account, type in your email address, and the site will ask you, do you want to link your account from Vancouver School Board? And if you click yes, it'll move all your information over to your North Van account. The only thing you'll have to do is just upload a new resume and cover letter and maybe your references as well. But that helps you to save a lot of time. So even though you have to create a separate account for each district, there is a way of simplifying that process and moving that forward quicker. And if you ever run into any issues with applying for jobs, you can always call us or email us. We're here to help. So that arrow helps to emphasize that button, which is super important. So how to get hired? So before I get to the next session, I just want to stop to see if there's any questions. So I'm looking at the chat box. Nothing at this point. Okay. If anything else comes up, I will pause the presentation and kind of go from there. So how to get hired? So just I'm just going to share some hiring tips. I mean, just because at Make a Future, in addition to operating the job board and the recruitment portal, our staff works quite closely with school districts, helping to facilitate the recruitment process. So one thing with our system that you should know is that when you set up an application portfolio or you register for an account on Make a Future, you're not actually applying for a job. You're just setting up your portfolio. It's not until you actually hit apply in the job posting that you're applying for a position. Another thing that you should also know is that when you create an application, those documents and your information is not visible to the district unless you set it to be visible. And a reason why you may want to set your application to be visible is because that'll allow school districts to search for candidates when they're doing some passive hiring. So maybe they're thinking about posting for a tech ed position in the future, but they want to see, who else is qualified for tech ed in their current teacher candidate pool. So by setting your application invisible, that will allow them to find your application. Otherwise, your application will be invisible. Another thing that I can't emphasize enough is that you should tailor your application to each role and to each district. I've seen so many applications that says, "Dear hiring manager, I'd like to work for your school district," but nothing really kind of talking about, what specifically about the school district attracted you to that role, or what specifically about the job actually attracted you to that position as well. And cover letters that don't even talk about their how your values will align with the district's values as well, or how you're able to contribute to the district's strategic plan. So definitely try to tailor your application as much as possible to the district and also the specific role. As I mentioned earlier, when you apply for jobs, you can link your teaching portfolio. Sorry, this is another point. Another thing that you can also do on our site is that you can link to your teaching portfolio. So the best way of hiring managers understanding, who you are as a candidate and what you're capable of is by looking at your references. But sometimes references are not great, and districts really want to see how you are in a classroom. So if you have a video that's showing, showing some of your experience during your practicum, try to include that in somewhere in your resume, link it somewhere. If you have a teaching portfolio that you want to show off, link it to a Google Drive, link your resume to a Google Drive so that, districts can actually see, these are some of the lesson plans I've created, and this is what I'm capable of. Because even though there's a lot of jobs right now, there's still competition. And if there's a really specific position that you're super keen on and it doesn't come up often, highly recommend, taking that extra effort to tailor your application, but also helping districts illustrate how good of a teacher you are in the classroom and how well you perform. Another thing that I also recommend is that, a lot of you are graduating with, little work experience, but if you have work experience in other organizations, definitely include that in your resume as well, just because there's a lot of transferable skills that you can highlight in your past jobs that are relevant to, working at a school. Because working in a school is not just about, being able to teach your lesson plans and understanding the curriculum and managing kids, but it's also about showing up on time. How do you work well with your colleagues? What's your approach for professional development? People want to know that sort of thing. And also another good thing to include, this is kind of redundant, but include good references. Because not a lot of you will have a lot of teaching experience, districts will heavily rely on your references from people, especially from people who have observed you teaching. And also, they'll also lean heavily on your practicum reports as well. So any teachers that have witnessed that should be in your references. Yeah, so a good point coming from an attendee. I just have a question. How can I take videos of my teaching while also keeping students' privacy in mind? Yeah, so there are some ways you can get around that. I know some districts have kind of releases that they can ask students to sign, which don't necessarily cover student teachers. One thing that I would recommend is just if you are videoing, make sure you get the permission of the parents and also school administration. And when you're filming, film from the back of the classroom where you only see the backs of the heads of kids. And if you want to, if you don't want to include kids in your video, just do it from an angle where it just shows you and not the children in the classroom. And I believe there is some free software out there that can help you kind of put little covers on people's faces or little stickers on people's faces. So I think a simple Google search can help you find that. I can probably find some. I'm sure some people in this room know of some of those platforms, but it's definitely out there. But ideally, backup heads, that's probably the easiest thing to do. And honestly, they don't really need like a long snapshot of what you're like in the classroom. Just a few minutes here and there will kind of help to illustrate the point of how you perform in the classroom and how you work it as well. I hope that answers that question. Okay. What are appropriate references? So I touched on this earlier. So your sponsor teacher, principals, anyone who's observed your teaching, your practicum supervisors, I think that would be they would be relevant as well. And as I said, also include references and work experience from past jobs as well. So even if you worked at Starbucks, if you had a good reference, if you can get a good reference from your manager at Starbucks, definitely include that. If you worked at a community center or you did a summer camp, definitely include those references too. So the hiring process. So I'm just going to jump quickly into the hiring process as to how districts make hiring decisions, because I know sometimes when you submit your application, it kind of goes into a black hole. You're like, oh, I applied. Did they even receive my application? Or are they going to get back to me? And sometimes that's a little bit frustrating when you don't hear back. So what can you expect when you're applying on Make a Future? So when you're applying online through our site, you'll always get a notification when you've applied for a job. So once you hit the apply button, there'll be a pop-up on your screen that says your application has been submitted. There's also a job application log in the system that you can also look at, and you also get an email notification that will confirm that your application has gone through as well. And if that doesn't happen, contact our customer service team. There might be a technical issue that we can help you out with. And because there's so much hiring going on right away, you may not hear back from districts right away, especially the large districts like Vancouver School Board or Surrey School Board. Like they do a pretty good job in general for large boards of education of getting back to candidates. But if you don't hear back from them within a couple of weeks, it's okay to follow up. Usually it's about a couple of weeks that it takes for larger districts to follow up with you. But smaller districts, you may hear back right away just because they don't receive as many applications and they're keen on hiring you right away. But kind of factor in 2 to 4 weeks, so manage your expectations. Generally speaking, it's the HR department that's involved in the hiring process. You'll likely receive some kind of communication from them first. As to who conducts the interview, that really varies from employer to employer. In the independent school system, it's usually the principals that conduct the interview process. And in school districts, it's usually the school board, someone from HR. But for the larger school boards, the principals are actually involved as well, just because they want to know who they're hiring into their schools and they want to have a say in that. So just be aware that you can hear from either HR or a principal. And because you're back east, there's no expectation that you have to come to BC for an interview. Most likely it'll be a phone or virtual interview via Microsoft Teams. Most of the school districts use Teams and some school districts use Zoom, but it's mostly Teams. So just make sure that software is working for you on your computer before you jump into that interview. So how are hiring decisions made? Usually, the districts try to align the qualifications of the job to your qualifications, and they kind of set out a set of selection criteria to base that on. But because you're all in the early stages of your career, it's heavily influenced by your practicum evaluations or your practicum reports. So how you're evaluated in your last practicum or your longest practicum is how they'll view you as a teacher and whether or not they want to pursue the application or the hiring process with you. So when you're going to an interview or when you're writing your resume, just make sure that you show your passion for teaching and innovation for meeting the needs of all learners. You want to also show your commitment to social and emotional learning, because that's something that's very important in BC schools. That's actually something that's been growing in all school districts. You also want to show your understanding of collaborative and inquiry mindsets to teaching. Our curriculum's based on an inquiry based approach. So definitely check out the BC curriculum website if you're not familiar with the BC curriculum. because there's lots of updates on there as well. I'm not a curriculum expert, so I'm not going to go too much in detail about that. But our schools, our BC curriculum is slightly different from other provinces. It's very student-centered, and it's based on 4 core competencies, which also gives our teachers autonomy as to how they want to deliver content and how they want to organize their classrooms. And in BC, something that I didn't mention in the slides is that there's an emphasis on first people's learning, and also first people's perspectives, and that's kind of interwoven into all aspects of the BC curriculum. And there's also a huge outdoor education component to all our classrooms. I know a lot of teachers from Ontario and Alberta are interested in outdoor ed, but that's outdoor ed, that's a component in all our schools, even our urban school districts. But there are some independent schools that just focus on just outdoor ed, but you can find all that information on our website. So just a quick tips about the interview process, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, and we're kind of running to the end of our presentation. Most of the interviews will, especially long distance, will happen through video and phone. The thing that I want to emphasize is that the questions that you'll be asked are behavioral interview questions. So if you're not sure what behavioral interview questions are, connect with your career services department at UWO, and they can help you kind of understand what that means. But basically, behavioral questions are questions that will require you to provide an example of when you've demonstrated a particular skill, or when you've demonstrated a particular quality. So usually questions start like, give me an example of when you were able to manage a difficult classroom situation, and where both students were aggressive and in that situation. Or give me a situation of when you've had a conflict. Tell me, give an example of when you've had a conflict with your colleague, and how did you deal with that situation. So kind of those types of questions. And the best way to answer these types of behavioral questions is through something called the STAR technique. I'm not sure if I have it on the next slide. No, I think I deleted it. But basically, the STAR technique is, when you're framing your answers, you want to talk about the situation, or you talk about the task that was at hand, and then next talk about the action. What actions did you take to resolve that issue, and what is the result? So that's the STAR framework, and there's lots of information online about that as well, so you can Google that. As I kind of alluded to earlier in the interviews, you want to talk about your understanding of first people's learning principles and perspectives. You want to talk about your planning skills, and so on and so forth. But stuff that's pretty much the same as if you're interviewing for a job in Ontario. So yeah, that was the STAR technique, which I talked about earlier. So the next step, so if you are keen on coming to British Columbia, so the first step, in my opinion, is to get your OCT certificate, because if you have your OC certificate, it actually makes it easier for you to get your teacher regulation branch certificate, because under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, there's teachers who are certified in one province are able to obtain certification in other provinces without additional classwork or coursework, exams, or any other academic work as well. And usually if you apply for your teaching certificate, it usually takes 2 to 6 weeks. There's usually a pre-certification process, or a pre-assessment process, where they kind of look at your application just to see whether or not you have all your documents. And after it's confirmed that you have all your documents, then it'll take about another 4 weeks or so for them to evaluate your application. But as I also mentioned to you earlier, you can apply for jobs even before you receive your BC teaching certificate. And technically, you can even teach up to 20 days as an uncertified teacher. Another thing to also do, just because there's so many opportunities right now, research employers on makeafuture.ca. There's tons of opportunities. There's tons of employer profiles on Make a Future with videos and even contact information on certain recruiters as well. So do your research before coming to BC. And if you're unsure, just send us an email via Make a Future, and we can kind of provide you with some of that information as well. And another thing to do is that at Make a Future, we're actually holding a few information sessions over the next few weeks. So next week, we have an information session with Vancouver Island North School District and also Nisga'a School District, and they'll be talking about careers in their districts, and you can find all that sign-up information on our website. And then the following week, we have another information session with North Vancouver School District and another and potentially another Vancouver Island school district as well. Coming to these info sessions really gives you a good sense of what it's like to teach in these districts, and also learn about what these employers have to offer new teachers and what sort of support they have to offer new teachers as well. Because some districts have very formalized mentorship programs, which can be invaluable to a teacher starting their careers. And some districts may also have additional financial incentives that may not be advertised in their postings or on our website. So definitely check out our info sessions, and all the dates for that for those info sessions are on our website. And like I said to you earlier, it's great to have a resume and cover letter tailored to the position, but it's even better if you can have a professional portfolio to kind of showcase your lesson plans and all the work that you've done. Another thing to also do is if you're specifically targeting a specific school district and you don't see any of those job postings on our website, you can sign up for job alerts. So when the postings do get advertised on our site, you'll get an email right away to notify you that the jobs are online and you can apply. And another thing that I highly recommend that you're probably all doing already is attending virtual fairs. So in addition to fairs, UWO, BC school districts are attending events all across Canada. Last week we were in Halifax, Calgary, Lakehead University. So we're traveling all around. So just go to our website. We have a list of the events that we'll be attending. So if you're able to attend, definitely check that out, and you could potentially interview for jobs and maybe secure a job starting in September. So definitely check that out. So if you need to reach out, that email is for Cheryl on makeitfuture.ca, but you can also send an email to contact us at makeitfuture.ca if you have any further questions. Please subscribe to our email newsletter. You'll get information about our upcoming info sessions, and you'll also get information about other potential recruitment and incentives that are available to candidates as well. If you're on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with us. And that kind of leads us to the end of the presentation. Just some final words. Right now, as I said to you at the top of the presentation, great time to get a job in British Columbia. A lot of school districts have to offer in terms of recruitment incentives, but also just opportunities to grow as an educator. And if your philosophy in teaching aligns with BC and you enjoy teacher autonomy and also being able to have flexibility in how you deliver classroom content, our curriculum is probably the right one for you. And if you're really keen on a particular way of approaching education, such as Waldorf education or IB education, those opportunities are available for you in our independent schools. And if you're really keen on making a difference in communities, or First Nations and Indigenous schools are always hiring, and that experience is super invaluable for your employability in the future. And if you want to travel, our offshore schools are a great option too. And yeah, any follow-up questions, feel free to follow up. If not, I'll just end it there.
All right, thank you, Andrew, for the presentation, and thank you to all the participants that joined us today. As I mentioned, it is being recorded, so you can head back to that recording anytime you need more information, or you can contact the email that Andrew, or the emails that Andrew had highlighted. So thank you again, Andrew. I am going to end it there just so that this video has time to convert to a recording before I have to start the next session. But if folks have questions, they can definitely contact you through the ways that you mentioned. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop recording, and you have a little bit of a break until our next call at 2 o'clock. Okay, thank you.